He was standing there, smiling like always. But behind that smile was a lifetime of goodbyes. At 100 years old, Dick Van Dyke has lived longer than most of the legends he once stood beside. And according to interviews with People magazine, he has watched entire generations of Hollywood rise and then disappear. He made the world laugh, but life kept taking people away from him. From classic TV to iconic films, he built a career that shaped entertainment history. Yet what many people don't see is the quiet weight he carries every single day. Because when you live that long, you don't just collect memories. You collect losses. But here's what nobody told you. Some of those losses didn't just hurt, they changed him. In recent reflections, he admitted that certain celebrity deaths stayed with him for decades, not because of fame, but because of the personal bonds behind the scenes. These weren't just famous names. They were friends, mentors, people he laughed with when the cameras were off. And one of those losses, it hit so hard, he says he never fully recovered. Before we go deeper, let me ask you something. Do you think living a long life is a blessing? Or does it become painful when you have to watch everyone you love slowly disappear? Comment below. I really want to hear your thoughts. Because for him, that question isn't theoretical. It's reality. And this next part changes everything. The first loss that shook him didn't happen at the peak of his fame. It happened earlier than most people realize. And what happened next shaped how he would deal with death for the rest of his life. Before the fame, before the awards, something hit him hard. In the early years of his career, Dick Van Dyke was still finding his place in Hollywood, trying to prove he belonged among giants. Then came a loss that stopped him cold. Stan Laurel. To most people, Stan Laurel was just one half of a legendary comedy duo. But to Dick, he was something more, a quiet influence, a man who shaped how comedy should feel. According to interviews later in his life, Dick deeply admired Laurel's timing, his subtle expressions, and the way he could make people laugh without saying much at all. But in 1965, when Stan Laurel passed away, something shifted. It wasn't just sadness. It was a realization. The people you look up to don't stay forever. But here's what nobody told you. That moment planted a fear in him, a quiet one. Because if someone like Laurel could be gone so suddenly, then no one was untouchable, not even the legends. And this is where it gets dark. For the first time, Dick started to see fame differently. Not as something permanent, but as something fragile. A 2021 retrospective by The Hollywood Reporter noted that many performers of that era experienced a deep sense of loss when early comedy pioneers began to pass. Because they weren't just idols, they were the foundation of everything. For Dick, Laurel wasn't just a hero. He was a reminder of where it all began. And when that foundation cracks, you start to question everything built on top of it. But what happened next shocked everyone, because the next losses weren't distant figures he admired from afar. There were people standing right next to him, people he worked with, people he trusted, and one of them would leave a hole far deeper than he expected. Should you trust the people you work with, knowing one day they might be gone? Because for him, that question was about to become painfully real. Now it wasn't distant anymore. The losses moved closer. At the height of his career, Dick Van Dyke wasn't just working with stars. He was building real friendships behind the scenes. Long days on set turned into laughter off camera. These people became his second family. Then came 1995, and everything changed. Rose Marie, his co-star from The Dick Van Dyke Show, lost someone deeply connected to their shared world. But the real blow came with the loss of Maury Amsterdam, another beloved co-star. Maury wasn't just funny. He was the heart of the room. According to cast interviews archived by the Television Academy, Maury's presence kept the energy alive on set, and when he passed away in 1996, it left a silence no one could fill. But wait, it gets worse, because not long after, another loss hit even closer. Mary Tyler Moore. She wasn't just a co-star. She was magic on screen and warmth off it. Their chemistry made television history, but behind that, there was trust, respect, and years of shared moments the audience never saw. When she passed in 2017, Dick didn't just lose a colleague. He lost a piece of his past. Insiders close to him told People magazine that her death deeply affected him, bringing back memories of a time that could never be recreated again. And this is where it gets heavy, because these weren't isolated losses anymore. They were stacking, one after another, year after year. Psychologists call this cumulative grief, where repeated loss doesn't just add pain, it multiplies it, making each goodbye harder than the last. For someone like Dyke, who built his life around connection, that kind of grief cuts deeper than most people realize. And right in the middle of all this comes something you don't see coming. This next part of the story, very few people know about it. Subscribe right now so you never miss stories the mainstream media buries. Because the next loss, it wasn't just emotional. It was personal in a way that shook him to his core. And it would become the one death that changed everything. Who was it? You're about to find out. This wasn't just another loss. This one broke something inside him. For Dyke Van Dyke, the hardest goodbye didn't come from a co-star or a distant legend. It came from someone he truly loved. Annette Funicello. To the world, she was a Disney icon, full of light and joy. But to Dyke, she was a friend who carried quiet strength behind the scenes. They shared a bond that many people never fully understood. It wasn't loud. It wasn't public. But it was real. And this is where it gets dark. Annette had been battling multiple sclerosis for years, a disease that slowly took away her ability to move, speak, and live freely. And according to reports from the National MS Society, her condition worsened significantly in her final decade. Dyke watched it happen, step by step. He saw someone full of life slowly fade. But here's what nobody told you. That kind of loss doesn't happen in one moment. It happens over years. Every visit became harder. Every goodbye felt heavier. By the time she passed away in 2013, the grief had already been building for a long time. And when it finally happened, it didn't feel like closure. It felt like something unfinished. Psychologists describe this as anticipatory grief, where you begin mourning someone before they're even gone, and studies from the American Psychological Association show it can leave deeper emotional scars than sudden loss. For Dyke, this wasn't just about death. It was about helplessness. He couldn't fix it. He couldn't stop it. And for someone who spent his life making people feel better, that hurt the most. What happened next shocked everyone, because after this loss, something changed in him. Not publicly, not dramatically, but quietly. He started thinking differently about time, about aging, about what it really means to survive when others don't. And that realization leads us to something even heavier. What does it feel like to outlive almost everyone you once loved? Because at 100 years old, that's exactly where his story goes next. At some point, the room gets quieter. Not because people stop talking, but because they're no longer there. For Dyke Van Dyke, turning 100 didn't just mean reaching a milestone. It meant facing a reality very few people truly understand. He outlived almost everyone. Friends, co-stars, even rivals. And this is where it gets heavy. The golden age of Hollywood that he once lived in, it's mostly gone now. Names that once filled theaters and TV screens now exist only in old clips and fading memories. And according to a 2023 report by the American Film Institute, over 80% of major performers from the 1950s and 60s have passed away. That kind of loss changes how you see the world. Because when everyone around you disappears, you start asking a different question. Why am I still here? But here's what nobody told you. Survivor's guilt isn't just for tragedy. It happens in life too. Psychologists define it as the feeling that you've lived longer than others who deserved just as much time, and studies published in the Journal of Aging Studies show it can lead to deep reflection, loneliness, and even quiet sadness. For Dyke, this wasn't just theory. It was personal. Every memory became a reminder. Every story had someone missing from it. And yet, he kept going. He kept smiling in interviews. He kept dancing, even in his later years. Because maybe, in his mind, staying active was the only way to fight the silence. But wait, it gets worse. Because even with all that strength, there were moments he couldn't hide from. Moments where the weight of time caught up to him. Have you ever trusted life to go a certain way, only to watch everything slowly change without your control? That's exactly what he faced. Tell me your experience in the comments. I read every one. Because for him, this wasn't just about losing people. It was about losing an entire world. And now, at 100, he's finally saying what all of it meant. But his final words? They're not what you expect. They might change how you see your own life. And that's where we're going next. 100 years. That's how long Dick Van Dyke has lived, and somehow, he still wakes up with a reason to smile. But don't mistake that smile for ease. It was built through loss. In his recent interviews, including one with CBS News, he said something simple but powerful. You just keep going. And this is where everything comes together. After losing icons like Stan Laurel, close friends like Mary Tyler Moore, and deeply personal connections like Annette Funicello, he didn't become bitter. He became grateful. But here's what nobody told you. Gratitude at that level doesn't come easy. It comes after you felt the worst. A 2022 study published in the Journal of Positive Psychology found that people who live longer lives often develop stronger emotional resilience. Not because life gets easier, but because they learn how to carry pain without letting it consume them. That's exactly what he did. He didn't forget the people he lost. He carried them with him. Every laugh, every memory. They didn't disappear. They became part of him. And this next part changes everything. Because when asked about death itself, he didn't speak with fear. He spoke with curiosity. He once said he believes there's something more, a feeling that this isn't the end, and that belief gave him peace in a way most people spend their entire lives searching for. Not certainty, but comfort. And maybe that's the real lesson here. We spend so much time fearing the end that we forget to live the middle. We've all had moments where life takes something from us that we weren't ready to lose. What was yours? Share it below. Someone out there might need to hear your story today. Because in the end, his story isn't just about celebrity deaths. It's about survival. It's about memory. It's about choosing to keep going when everything tells you to stop. But here's the part we didn't cover today. There are still stories about his life. Moments behind the scenes, struggles he never fully opened up about, and secrets from Hollywood's golden age that very few people know. This story isn't over. There's one chapter we haven't touched, and it involves a side of Hollywood far darker than what you've seen here. That video is coming next. Don't miss it. And maybe the real question is, when your story reaches the end, what will people remember about you?